This Day in Sports History. This episode is brought to you by Firefly Books, and with you being a sports fan just like me, here's 2 suggestions for your next great sports read. If you love basketball, then you need to add Dave Zarum's book, NBA 75, The Definitive History. Uncover untold stories of triumph, controversy, and the greatest stars of the game. From the league's humble beginnings to its modern glory, it is a courtside seat to 75 years of NBA history. And if you're a golf fanatic, then you gotta check out Matt Adams' book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget. I've used it as a reference in this podcast over the past year for lots of stories that I've done, and I can tell you from experiencing it, this is a great book. Relive 50 of golf's most memorable moments through the eyes of the legends themselves. It's the closest you'll ever get to walking the fairways with the greatest to ever play the game. Grab your copy of NBA 75 or The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, available from Firefly, wherever you get your books. Well, hey there, and welcome back to another edition of This Day in Sports History. Appreciate you joining me. And, of course, This Day in Sports History is a member of the Sports History Network. If you go simply to sportshistorynetwork.com, you can find more podcasts of interest and a whole lot more info. It is August 26th, and on this day in sports history back in 1951, Toronto Maple Leaf Bill Barilko took off on a plane with a friend. Neither was heard from again. Most people who knew Bill Barilko would have said he was a pretty fortunate guy, blessed with good luck and good looks. He grew up playing hockey on the frozen ponds of Timmins, Ontario, skipping school on more than one occasion to go work on his skating. His skating ability and his vicious checking style caught the eyes of a professional team, and at the age of 19, he got a call to go play professionally. Now, not in some Canadian backwater or even a traditional hockey haven. Instead, he headed to the sunny shores of Los Angeles to play with the Hollywood Wolves of the Pacific Coast Hockey League. His Hollywood good looks made him a natural fit there, and he became friends with a few actors and actresses in his short time there. Bill Barilko, the small-town kid from Timmins, hanging out with Hollywood starlets. What a lucky kid. He wasn't there long, though. In 1947, the then 20-year-old Barilko was called up to the big club. The Toronto Maple Leafs had some injured guys, and they needed somebody who could hit. They didn't need a scorer or much of a skater, really. They just needed a physical presence, a good hitter, and a warm body for a few games. Bill Barilko, the kid from small-town Timmins, was being called up to the NHL after less than a year in the minors. And not just a rung down, the Pacific Coast League was several rungs down the ladder from the NHL. But once he got there, his star shone brightly. In his first game, the Leafs played the Montreal Canadiens with Maurice Richard. The Canadiens wiped the ice with the Leafs that night, but the star of the game for Toronto was Bill Barilko and his ability to put Richard and the other Montreal stars on their backside consistently. His short couple of games turned into a 5-year stint with the Leafs. Not only that, but Toronto won the Stanley Cup in 47, and then followed that up with Cup wins in 48, 49, and again in 51. And Bill Barilko? Well, he happened to score the series-winning goal against Montreal to win the Stanley Cup in 51, their 4th in 5 years. Combining his regular season and playoff goals, he only scored 31 in his career. Bill Barilko, the kid from Timmins, found the puck on the tape of his stick and scored the cup-winning goal. Unfortunately, that would be the last goal he would score in the last game he ever played. Barilko may have traveled all over North America, but his heart was still in Timmins, and he loved hunting and fishing in remote parts of Ontario. In August, Barilko took off in a Fairchild seaplane with his friend and his dentist, Dr. Henry Hudson, for a hunting trip to northern Ontario. By most accounts, Hudson was a very skilled pilot. The two were seen fueling up the plane for the return trip home on this day, but after that, they were never seen alive again. When Barilko and Hudson did not arrive on the evening of the 25th, Barilko's friends and family began to worry. Searches were started, but nothing was found. Toronto started training camp for the 1952 season in September. No Bill Barilko. The Leafs kept his number and name in the program and his locker stall just as he left it, in the slim hope that maybe he'd walk through the doors one day with one hell of a story. It was not to be. And it was not until nearly 11 years later, in June 1962, that a pilot finally spotted the wreckage. Barilko could only be identified by the Maple Leafs watch he'd been wearing on his wrist. There'd been lots of speculation about the cause of the crash. Was it carrying too heavy a load? Did it run out of fuel? Did weather play a role? That part of the mystery has never been solved. Bill Barilko was 24 years old. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. So if you like hanging out in your den, your living room, perhaps your man cave or your back deck, or maybe you sneak down to the garage to watch a game, well, you can say a little thanks to what happened on this day in 1939. There were more people sitting at Ebbets Field than were watching on television on this day, but this was indeed a most important event for the new technology of broadcast TV. The NBC experimental television station W2XBS broadcast a Major League Baseball game for the first time. The Brooklyn Dodgers were playing at home against the Cincinnati Reds for the Saturday afternoon affair. They actually played a doubleheader on the 26th, but only the first game was televised. More than 33,000 fans shuffled to their seats to watch the game in person, while only about an estimated 400 were able to watch it on television screens in New York State. Now, this was definitely in the infancy of television. It wasn't until April 30th of that year that television broadcasting even began in the U.S. At the opening of the New York World's Fair 4 months earlier, NBC aired President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's welcome address via television. Now, at this stage in the game, televisions were incredibly expensive, so only the wealthy and very enthusiastic first adopters had purchased one. For the game, 2 cameras were used, one set up in the upper deck down the third base line and another at ground level behind home plate. Radio play-by-play man Red Barber, who had broadcast the first Dodgers game on radio on April 18th of that year, was tapped to provide the commentary on the action, and he worked solo from the upper deck. He did not have the benefit of a monitor, and he had to keep a constant check on where the cameras were pointed to predict what they were actually showing the folks watching at home. It had been Barber's idea to attempt to broadcast the game via television in the first place. He had to convince Dodger GM Larry MacPhail that it was a good idea. Now, that probably wasn't that hard to sell. MacPhail had been a forward thinker on radio broadcasts when he was the GM of Cincinnati. And it is a good thing it was MacPhail because prior to his arrival, the 3 New York clubs, the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Giants, colluded to keep their games off of radio, fearing that radio broadcasts would hurt their attendance. The 3 clubs had actually signed an agreement in 1934 to ban radio broadcasts at their home parks. MacPhail ended that at the start of the season in 1939, and he was able to show that the opposite actually happened. Radio broadcasts created interest and exposure, and they drew more people to the ballpark. In the ball game on this day, the Dodgers gave Barber something to talk about in the second inning when they plated 2 runs. The game stayed that way until the 8th when the Reds scored 5, aided by 2 errors by catcher Babe Phelps. Cincinnati won the first televised game 5-2, and after the game, Barber had to sprint downstairs and onto the field to conduct post-game interviews with Reds manager Bill McKechnie and Dodgers shortstop and skipper Leo DeRocher. The experiment that happened on this day did not lead to an explosion in television coverage. It was more of a slow burn. It was not until 8 years later, in 1947, that the World Series was broadcast and became an annual event at that point. Regular broadcasts of baseball games really didn't begin to happen until 1953, when more and more people began adding televisions into their homes. But the next time you happen to sit down to watch a game on your television, give a little nod and thanks to Red Barber, Larry McPhail, and the old Brooklyn Dodgers for taking a chance on broadcasting the first game on this day in 1939. On this day in 2001, it was a sudden death playoff where both golfers refused to die. Tiger Woods and Jim Furyk were all square after 72 holes at the NEC Invitational at Firestone Country Club in Ohio. The two played as a pair in the final round, with Tiger firing a final round 69 to pull even with Furyk after Sunday's 18. They went to a sudden death playoff, and it nearly ended on the first hole when Furyk left his bunker shot in the sand before chipping in for a par. The pair equaled each other for 6 holes, and on to the 7th they went. When Furyk's tee shot wound up under a tree and then his punch-out got stuck in the rough, well, that signaled that the end was near. Tiger's second shot was a dagger to the heart, stopping 2 feet from the cup. He tapped in for birdie to win the playoff and win for the 3rd consecutive year at Firestone. The 7-hole sudden death playoff came up just a little bit short of the longest sudden death playoff on the PGA Tour in its history. That happened in 1983 at the Phoenix Open, when Bob Gilder beat Rex Caldwell in an 8-hole playoff. And how about a couple of dominant golf performances from this day? First, let's step back to 1990, when José Maria Olazabal introduced himself with authority to the PGA Tour. The 24-year-old Olazabal had played on the European Tour for 4 years already, winning 8 times at this point, but he was not yet a fixture in the States. He was invited to play in the World Series of Golf event at Firestone. He smoked the tires and then the field in this one, firing an opening round and course record 61 to take control, and he never looked back. He put it in cruise control on this day when he realized he was 12 strokes clear of everybody else with 16 holes to play. Heck, Greg Norman could have kept a lead that large. Olazabal won his inaugural PGA Tour event by 12 shots, the largest margin of victory on the PGA Tour in the previous 15 years. Second place that day went to Lanny Watkins, who congratulated him, but he was ready to buy him a plane ticket back to Spain. Of course, Olazabal did return on occasion, winning the Masters in 1994 and again in 99. It wasn't until 2001 that he began to play the PGA Tour regularly. And on this day in 1961, it was the most dominating performance in a U.S. women's amateur event. The Women's U.S. Amateur that year was played in Tacoma, Washington, and this was a match play event, and the final was a 36-hole format. But it did not come anywhere close to needing that many holes. It was done shortly after lunch. Anna Quast-Decker had stormed through the field to reach the finals and was set to play Tish Preuss. Weather played a larger part in the margin of victory on this day. A heavy overnight rain saturated the fairways. Decker hit high lofting drives and approach shots. Preuss was prone to hitting low shots and tried to let the ball run. Well, that works fine on dry fairways, but not so much on waterlogged ones. Decker was 6 up after the first 9, 12 up after the morning 18. The afternoon round only went to the 5th hole, with Decker winning 14 and 13, meaning that she was up 14 holes with 13 holes to play. That broke a 33-year-old record for the greatest margin of victory. Of the 112 holes that Quast-Decker played in her 7 matches, she lost only 6. And on this day in 1973, the movie Bang the Drum Slowly, starring Robert DeNiro as a baseball player with a terminal illness, debuted in theaters. Yankee Stadium and Shea Stadium were used for baseball scenes in the movie that some have in their top sports movies of all time. For those sensitive guys out there who don't like to show their emotions, you may want to choose a point towards the end of the movie to go chop some onions. Time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Hey, did you know that if you type the word askew, A-S-K-E-W, into Google, the screen gets all tilty? Truly it does. I just did it. And it's a thing. Yeah, so give it a shot. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.